you that, Patrick will be happy to show you. Right, we offer camera tutorials as part of the service. Right, okay, here they both come. God, they're so tall. Anyway, please welcome Mark Greaney and Jack Carr. Oh, there you are. Perfect. All right. Yay. Okay, there we go. One more. Perfect. All right. Thank you. I'll put your book back here. All right. Do you want to sit next to Jack? I'll sit over here on the other. Right.
All right.
You'd think we would have perfected this together, but not quite. So, how many of you were here last summer for the epic event with Stephen Hunter and Jack? Yep. Oh, wow. Wasn't that a great night?
It was great, yeah.
It was really good. Right. Thank you for doing that.
Absolutely. This thing's working. All right.
It is working.
Here we are.
All right.
And here we are again. Amazing. Thank you guys for being here tonight. I sincerely appreciate it. We have Facebook Live audience as well, so
We do. Welcome to them.
all of you guys. So before we start, I just want to thank Barbara Peters for inviting us here to do this again.
Yeah, for sure.
This is the spot that every author wants to start their book tour with.
Yeah.
There's no other place to start besides Poison Pen in Scottsdale, Arizona. So thank you to Barbara Peters for that.
This is a man who could kill me with one finger, so I always try to keep that in mind.
He's been out of the military a while, he needs two fingers.
And I have Brad Hunter coming back Friday night who could do the same thing, so we have the SEALs and the Rangers really represented.
I brought backup. He's in much better shape than I am.
You know, Mark is always in fabulous shape, and I want to felicitate Mark on two counts. One, for his fabulous 1 minute out for your 9th Gray Man book, right?
Yeah, thank you.
But also, you're newly engaged.
I
'Cause
did.
I follow you on Instagram.
I didn't even tell her this long.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I just got engaged a couple weeks ago.
That beautiful blonde woman. Does she know what she's in for?
Do I know what I'm in for? I'm going from living all alone in a 5,000 square foot house with 2 dogs to 3 kids and 4 dogs.
Whoa, she comes with baggage. I didn't realize
Yeah, but no,
that.
it's just like everybody gets along really great. Even the dogs mostly get along. They get along for part of each night, and that's all you can ask for.
So you're building a shed out in back for a writing studio, right?
We're looking for new property. A little more space.
Extra kids and extra dogs will make it so much easier to write.
Oh, really? That was my whole game. Like, this will help my career. I'm here to announce my retirement.
I can't wait for this next year to ask you how that's going.
I know Jack should know because he has both kids and dogs and a pretty heavy travel schedule,
Yeah.
which I have just added to by inviting him to do a fabulous event in Washington on the 1st of May if he can make it.
I'd love to.
So we'll see how that goes. It'll be wonderful. Anyway, two of my favorite guys, and this is so exciting too. So I do have a question. Are you going to be interviewing Mark or am I? Because I'm assuming that you've read the book.
Oh, well, I am getting my book here tonight. So I haven't read the book, but I know enough about it. And
I can talk you through it. I know pretty much everything.
I always hear these excuses, you know, it's like, okay, we just came for dinner, really. You know, there was always this conversation about what's the name of the guy that the Vanity Fair editor, Braden, what's his name? Braden Carter, do I have that right?
Yeah.
Was famous for the after parties after the Academy Awards, and you were nobody if you didn't get invited to one of his after parties. So we've instituted a version of that here, haven't we? Where
Maybe.
authors, it's the after party they come for.
Yeah.
You guys are just here for show.
The year that Barbara doesn't invite me to dinner afterwards, I know that it's like this is the beginning of the steep decline.
Long slide downhill. But no, in all seriousness, I really do want to thank you. Your support for the authors just means the world to them, and we wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. You guys are the most important people in the room, really. So thank you again for coming. And if I'm going to,
I'm sorry, can I say one more thing about, as we're singing your praises, I was just up in New York a few weeks ago and for like a marketing meeting, and they were going down they were showing me like what cities I sell, what percentage and what percentage in each city, and they're like, Phoenix, Scottsdale is really over-indexed in here. You know, it's like I sell a ton of books here compared to the size of this city compared to like other cities and stuff like that, and it's 100% because of Poison Pen, obviously.
It's all these lovely people out here.
Well, yeah, right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But Mark,
You're the middleman.
you've been with us well, part of the Gray Man, but you also have been with us when you were writing in the Clancy universe. So how
Yeah.
many books did you do in that?
I did 7. I did 3 with Tom before he died, and I did 4 more after he passed. 4 more Jack Ryan books.
So you actually knew Tom.
Yeah. I was his co-author for his last 3 books.
I was asking that in part because Joshua Hood, the Gentleman Coming Monday in the Ludlum universe,
Yeah.
clearly didn't meet Robert because he died in 2001.
Yeah.
So I was just, I'd forgotten whether you'd spent real time with Tom.
Yeah, I did, and it's funny. Josh is a good friend of mine.
Oh, is he?
We live in the same town, which is he's the only
Memphis?
other thriller writer for 1,000 miles. No, Brad Thor lives in Nashville, but that's but yeah. So it was funny. I introduced him to my editor, who
Tom?
who picked him for Treadstone. So yeah, he and I have a similar. We're traveling a similar path, I guess.
It's a very good book. Lots of military action.
Yeah.
So a question for both of you. Do you have to be, because Mark isn't, do you have to be an experienced military officer or whatever you might be in order to write this kind of fiction?
No, absolutely not. It's interesting going back and seeing some guys that had experience in World War II, World War I, Korea, that came out, and sometimes I'm surprised when I look into some of these authors that the really ones I saw on my parents' bookshelves, that now I go back and look at their backgrounds that had some of that, but then there are plenty, of course, that never had any experience in the military and knocked it out of the park and really and can do a lot better job because of their interviews with people and how they interpret what happened downrange and how they put that on the page, and so it's anybody can do it.
And we don't have to get DoD approval. Like
You had to bring that up.
I did.
Never doing that again.
Now, I asked that question in part because some of you know there's been this alarming trend towards what's being called cultural appropriation. Some of you may have run into the conversation about American dirt and so forth, but I don't think you have to be who you're writing about. You don't, it's fiction, right? You get to make things up. And so, you may come at what you're writing from some actual life experience, and Mark is coming at it from a different place, but that doesn't mean that, anybody's book is better than the other or more authentic than the other.
Yeah.
I'm really annoyed by this whole trend because I think it's a real
all in the
straitjacket for
storytelling, and
authors.
if you limit people on who they can talk about, then it's like I feel like I have an open mind to where every different type of person can be really, really good or really, really crappy, and it's like if you speak about one section of the population, if you know what if you do the research or if you hit the best you can, then I don't see any problem.
Well, it's a loaded question for you, baby, because you're writing about the world's greatest assassins. You're coming at it from life experience. Jack and I need to duck right now.
Yeah, I call it the crime writers. Like, they don't have to go out and murder somebody to figure out. Thank goodness. Yeah, thank goodness
So
you don't have to.
I see that you're prepped with a piece of paper, so
Yeah.
take it away, babe.
I did come prepped, and usually, who's been here before for us here?
No,
Oh, yeah.
this is my first time.
All right, but how many of you have seen Mark before?
Pictures.
All right, awesome. And so usually I start off by asking, because I want to find out where Mark came from and what were his influences at an early age and when he started writing and all that sort of thing. But this time, because there's so many people who have been here before for this, I want to dive right in to 1 Minute Out, because I'm very excited about this next one, primarily because it's written in the first person.
Yeah, the hero, Court Gentry, who's my protagonist, his scenes are written in the first person, so you actually, hear his thoughts, his mindset, his thinking. I decided to do that. I wanted to do it for a while. Some great authors do it, and some authors kind of bounce around. Lee Child has done a few in first person, and it seemed to work out okay for him, right? And so I basically chickened out of doing it in an earlier book where it could have been done, and for this one, he's on the parts of the story where I really want the reader to understand his inner thoughts. He's all alone, so you can't really do the dialogue where you play off, you know, what he's thinking and his reasoning. So I thought, well, why not have him address the readers directly? And it's kind of a slightly different take on first person. It's present tense, so you sort of see what he sees as he sees it, and it's relayed in that manner. And I think it worked pretty well. I'm going back to third person for the next one. It's not like a permanent change, but it's something that I felt would work for this book.
And what surprised you the most about doing that? Was there anything along that path that you didn't expect to have happen as you wrote in the first person?
Honestly, as I started it, I think I got a little too like jocular and too like you know, breaking the fourth wall and talking to you, the reader, and then I sort of had to rein that back a little bit and be like, okay, so we want to keep the story moving. I don't want there to be any distraction in the story from people going like, oh, this is not how it was done before. That's inevitable to some degree. People have seen things, you know, 8 books this one way, and this is slightly different and slightly skewed, but the story is as big or bigger. It's grittier than any other stories, I would say, and you know, I think it worked for this book.
And other than a surprise, was there a challenge to doing it where you got to a point and said, okay, I'm not writing this, I'm writing this in the first person, so how am I going to tackle this other perspective?
Yeah, I would slip into third person for anybody that wasn't, if it was a scene that it wasn't Court as the narrator, I would go into third person and you can bounce that first and third back, it's not a big deal. But writing Court in first person, the challenge was, it's like everybody who's read these books, has an impression of how he thinks and what his internal, you know, monologue is like, and I wanted to give them what they expected him to be, and hopefully, you know, he's probably more smart alecky when he's in the first person, because there's a lot of things he doesn't say but thinks, but at the same time, it should be the same character that it was when he was in third person.
Right. And in this one, for those that follow Mark online, know that he goes to different places to do his research. And for this one, this is the Croatia research trip.
Yeah, I went to Bosnia and Croatia and Italy and Hollywood.
And when you're doing that, were those trips, did you learn anything about the storyline as you went there, or did it help the plot, or was it just to add flavor to the novel itself and add authenticity?
I get ideas wandering around, so sometimes I go places and really don't know what I'm going to write about. I just trust that I will find something or manufacture something while I'm there. For this one, I had some places I wanted to see just for location research. I definitely wanted the atmospherics of what it's like in Mostar, Bosnia, and this and that. But once I got there, I spent hours, whole evenings, just walking through like narrow alleyways, taking pictures of like random things, and you know, people think I'm like a tourist that got hit on the head, and it's like just like wandered off down this, not in a tourist section, and I'm photographing, but I'm like photographing walls just to show that it's too sheer for somebody to climb this, you know, and I just look at all that later. So big story wise, it probably didn't change much in the story, but action scenes, you know, where they have dinner, this sort of thing, I like to get it as authentic. The way these stories work is there's a lot of like hard to believe stuff that happens in any big action suspense thriller, and there's some suspension of disbelief. So it's my job for the rest of the book to make it as accurate as I can to sell you on the hard to believe part.
Right.
Can I ask
Yeah.
a quick, Mark,
Yeah.
when you were in Croatia, which has really turned into like a whole cruise ship thing, at least along the coast.
Yeah.
You know, what part of Croatia were you in? Because it's quite different up in the mountains
Yeah.
than it is on the seacoast.
Yeah, I was on the coast, but I was in Dubrovnik, which obviously is,
Right.
you know, Disney World of Croatia, I guess. But I was also in a port city called Rovinj up
Right.
north, and in the Istria Peninsula, I think it's called. And so those were 2 places I went there. And in
Yeah, it's
Bosnia,
below Trieste, right.
yeah, Bosnia, I went to Mostar, which is sort of southwestern Bosnia.
I'm just curious because Croatia is because cruise ships have had, you know, a really interesting effect on an awful lot of destinations, and Hvar, which is a little island right off the coast of Croatia, is actually one of the few places that has started to ban cruise ships because it has just played such hell with the, you know, the economy and the infrastructure and the whole bit.
Yeah, just congestion.
We took a trip down the coast many years ago on a little Croatian ship, which was hilarious. The shower, you had to stand on the toilet and pull this on a curved thing, the shower curtain around you, and then you could take a shower, and then you try not to slip out of the bathroom and break your neck because the whole floor was wet. And the food was really interesting, but it was so gorgeous because it was unspoiled. And I thought about going back, and then I thought, I don't want to because I'd rather remember.
Your impressions of it are perfect.
I mean, I think we could see with the coronavirus thing, that cruise ships are becoming an increasing problem in all kinds of ways. When you've got that many people, in a small place. But also the larger question is what happens when they get there and they all get off.
Right.
6,000 people on a little tiny island. So I was just curious whether that played into what you were doing or not.
I mean, the touristy areas definitely play into the story. A lot of congestion, and I talk about that. In fact, I was in Venice doing research as well, and I was in Venice in 1985, and I was in Venice in 2019, and it feels like Disney World. Like you just feel like you're in a line to go any place or to get anything. It's incredibly crowded, and not that there are cruise ships obviously in Venice, but it's just the congestion of being early June. So it's summertime in Venice, but I worked that all into the story, and believe me, late at night you get off of the main drags, you find some like really creepy places that are great for an intrigue novel, and I've got hours of video of me just wandering along trying to get into trouble, but the tourist it's a negative, and Cork feels the same way. Surprising.
Yeah, but for military fiction, if you have a big crowd, you can have a really big bang. So I'm not sure that's not really. It's hard to have the same effect if there are 3 people on the street, except for right? Crowd scenes, big part of it.
I saw those pictures from Croatia, so I wouldn't be surprised. And I sent them to my wife and said, "What do you think about doing some research, quote unquote, in Croatia for the next book 5, 6, 7, or 8, somewhere in there." So if that happens, then you'll know
Well,
why.
I hope you do it, and I hope you go to Bosnia. I don't know if you've been, but it was really, really nice. I didn't know what to expect. I like the people. I like the countryside. I like the town. I like the food. It was a really cool experience, and I didn't know what to expect.
You go to some pretty rough places for your research, I've noticed. Venice and Bahamas.
Earlier in my series, I was like down in the cartel country for Mexico and stuff like that, and now I went to the Bahamas. It wasn't for research, but I'm desperately trying to think of some way to work it into a book. So, I've been to the Bahamas a few times for scuba diving, but I haven't come up with a plot in the Bahamas.
Other than that, are there some other places that we can expect in Grayman 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 that you want to visit and weave into a plot?
Definitely Grayman 10. I'm going to, the book that I'm working on now, I'm going to United Arab Emirates, to Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and I'm going to Berlin for a couple weeks, and I'll do that later in the spring, and so those are sort of the locations of that. I've always wanted to do one in Japan. I've never been to Japan. I've been to Asia, but I've never been to Japan. And I don't know if we're getting ahead of ourselves, but I wrote a book last year called Red Metal that came out, and Rip, the co-author, and I just agreed to do a follow-up.
That was so much fun. They were both here for that.
Yeah.
Were you here for that one too?
No,
or was it just Rip and Mark and
I
me?
saw him a couple weeks later at the Stephen Hunter thing.
Right.
Yeah. So that don't hold your breath, because those books are hard to write. They take a lot, and he and I will spend a lot of time in Asia and doing some research for that book.
Is he writing anything on his own? Because
Yeah,
I was
he's
thinking about that.
Yeah, he's got a 2-book deal with Kensington.
Does he?
He's turned the first one in.
That's so exciting.
Yeah, I'm happy for him.
Wow, we knew he won.
Yeah.
That's one of my questions.
Oh,
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so taking it back a little bit, now when you look back and look at the 7 books, the 3 you did with Tom Clancy and the 4 you did for the UK Estate afterward, are there some lessons that you got from him, the time you spent with him, that carry over to what you're doing today, to Grandman 9 and 10 going forward? A lesson or something, the wisdom that he imparted on you, work ethic or whatever it might be?
Yeah, I absolutely, because I can see it in my books. My first 3 books to me are one set. That's Gray Man, On Target, and Ballistic. and then Deadeye was the first book after I'd been working with the Tom Clancy stuff, and it's larger in scope. It's a little more geopolitical. It's a little more intrigue. I feel like there's virtually 100% of the action, but you know, there's just more. The books got bigger, which is definitely the Clancy effect, and then Backblast and the books after that. So the Gray Man, my first book was 101,000 words, and my longest book I think was Agent in Place or Mission Critical. It was 166, and this one is 161. So yeah, which I kick myself for. It's very much a self-inflicted wound because I have friends who are thriller authors that write great books that are 90,000 words, and I'm like, basically did twice that, and I don't get paid.
Half to make them 2 books.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just, I think people would get annoyed if you cut right in the middle of a book. People always say that, but it's like, wow, no one would like that. It's not even a cliffhanger. It's just like it just stops.
Do you think that's a change in your writing style, Mark, or do you think it's because you've made the stories bigger? Why have they jumped that big?
I've made the stories bigger. With the Clancy books, I was going deep and wide, whereas the Gray Man books, it wasn't a very wide story, but it was very deep. You know, he's trying to rescue these 2 girls, and there's a million things that happen along the way, or whatever. And now the story, there's more characters, a little more settings and scenes, and I think it just grew that way. I physically have to rein myself back in here and there because I have these times where, you know, I'm 3/4 of the way through the story, and Josh, who'll be here next week, he calls it the good idea fairy. You know, it's like you're late in the game and you're trying to turn your book in, and you're like, oh, it'd be really cool if this, and then you start to work that back in. I'm disciplined enough to not do too much of that now, but I've done some of it before. It ends up getting cut out in the edits anyhow. I'm very, I read my later edits as if, you know, doubting every word on the page and seeing if it needs to be there.
And you have some great gear in the books, some great weapons in the books, and you train with James Yeager,
Yeah.
some of that stuff,
Yeah.
and then you. What is your favorite thing that you've done as far as research, as far as training goes, or research goes, that's made its way in here, as far as weapons craft?
Oh my goodness, that's really tough because I've done quite a bit over the years. I think probably like my most intense experience in any of that was, and I've done this a few times, is be on op for a SWAT shoot houses. So you're in a shoot house. It's night. They flip all the lights off. They give you an MP5, and the place where I was doing it. And the first time I was there, I was like, are there a lot of gangbangers in Memphis with MP5s? And they're like, no, but we gotta, you know, like we were able to get a bunch of these cheap from the military or whatever. So it's a real gun, and they're loaded with simunitions, which is a real bullet, but it fires paint. I mean, it hits you with paint. It's not paintball. Trust me, I've got scars. But yeah, and they flip the lights off. They play gangster rap, and then you wait in a back room while the SWAT comes to kill you. Eventually they do. The first time I did it, I was like, man, I'm Rambo. I was doing really, really well, and then I got shot in the knuckle. And I had gloves on and everything, and it's like I saw stars. It hurt so bad. I got shot. And then it's funny. Then after that, every now and then I'll get somebody, but a lot of times that come around the corner, and I've been waiting for them for 10 minutes, and I get it right to the end. But it's good. You wouldn't want it to be the other way if these are your law enforcement professionals. But I've done that. I've done civilian contractor training and that sort of stuff with cars. That's all a lot of fun. I've done some long range shooting. I'm not very good at it, but I know how to talk about it. So that's important. That was really all. Yeah, that's my job.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's perfect. And then the high risk tactical response. That's the one with James Yeager.
Yeah. It's called high risk civilian contractor, and it's a week where you're just basically on a team as if you're, you know, out there deployed somewhere in Afghanistan as a security contractor, and it's all live fire. There's a lot of kind of incoming fire, a lot of pyrotechnics. There's a lot of. It was a big eye opener. On day one, I was like, I do not belong here. How do I sneak away? And there was no way to sneak away because you all live in a team room and you're all in one big, you know, SUV, and you know, it's like a crap, if my car was in the parking lot, I'd probably make a run for it. But then by day 3 or 4, it's like you just feel like you've just become part of this team, integrated. It's nice.
And how has the writing process for you evolved since the first novel, or the second one, I guess? Let's say after you've got a publishing deal, the first one's out there, it's time to do the second. Between that second novel and today, taking out the times that you wrote 2 every year for a while, how's that process changed for you? Is it the idea that comes, you have an idea first, then comes a title, an outline, a synopsis, or a synopsis first, and then an outline, and then title eventually works its way in? Is there any sort of method to that that's evolved over
There's
the years?
really no rhyme or reason. I get ideas for books in different ways. They come together in different ways. Sometimes I know the ending, sometimes I don't. I have a very disorganized brain, but it's very fertile, and so there's after a while, and I think this is how it's changed, is I've been able to like pull things in and order things in the right way. I remember one of the Tom Clancy books I did, I think it was due in like 2 weeks, and I was like, I don't understand my story. I'm so confused. So I called. Yeah,
It's understandable.
which is like your heart is like missing beats when you realize that, and you're like, gosh, if I don't understand it. So I ended up getting a little more time, and then just like took some steam out of the kettle, and I just relaxed a little bit. It's like, all right, figure out where your problems are and what your problems are. But it is this big sort of confusing thing in my head that I'm trying to rein in, and I take notes and stuff like that. Usually don't even look at them again. It's just taking notes helps. And then I put the whole book in a Word document, not by chapters. I don't do Scrivener. There's some really good writing software that I just don't understand well enough to do. And I spend a lot of time, probably not very efficiently, going like, okay, wait, what was he supposed to do? Like, I had a great idea about what this guy was going to do, and it just as it starts to form on the page, you just get a little bit more organized, and a little bit more organized. I always, and this, I've heard this from other authors as well. I'm very proud of the books that I've done. I'm very proud of this book. I'm very proud of everything I've written. But every year, the book I'm working on right now is an absolute disaster. It's the worst thing ever, and no one's gonna like it. And it's not until those last edits where you feel like you get it tuned in to where it needs to be. So I spend 4/5 of the time just sure the whole thing is a sham. You know, it's like, oh, this book's good. Yeah, I hope you enjoy it. Because next year I'll be the guy making your coffee up the street. And I don't think that's ever going to change. It hasn't. Each book, there's parts in there where at this point in my career I'm like, yeah, I think that's really going to resonate with readers. But I think I'm a perfectionist to the point where if the book's not done and perfect, then it's terrible. So I'll be missing a couple little threads in the story and just be like, this thing's a mess. So it's all about kind of organizing things in your head. I wish there was like, I remember before I was published, I went to a writer's conference, and I can't remember the name of the author, which is probably good because I'm going to kind of slag on him a little bit. Well, I don't know, it could be true, but he was saying how like he does each chapter in advance, and he plots out the whole chapter, and he gets all his research for the chapter, and each one goes in a folder, and he'll have 45 chapters, and then he sits and he writes a chapter a day and everything. I was like, that's not how I am. And that's, I wasn't published at that point. I was like, that's what you have to do to be published. And it's like, this is my 19th book being published, and like 23rd book that I finished, and I still don't. I still can't do what he did.
That's great to hear. I was asking for a friend, by the way.
Let's turn the tables and ask Jack.
Uh-oh.
Is that how you write?
So they've been fairly similar up to this point, and this fourth one that I'm in the middle of now is the first one that's different, because the first 3 were all ones that were ideas for the first book, or could have been the first book, because I had about 6, 7, 8 different ideas for that first one, and those became the first book, the second book, the third book, and they'll become books 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, but there was this one gap that needed to be filled with book 4, so I'm in the middle of that right now. So it's the first one really where I'm in this stage that it's not as well thought out as all these other ones ahead of time. So it's an interesting position to be in. It's the first time that I've been in that position, but it's also exciting, because it's new territory, and like you said, it's not just for writing, but for anything in life. And for us on the battlefield, it was when things got crazy, you just take a breath, look around, and then make the call. And that kind of just calms you
Right.
down a little bit. So
Right.
same thing on the written page when it seems crazy like that, just like you said,
Yeah.
just take a breath, let
Yeah.
things simmer down a little bit,
Yeah.
and then you work through the problem.
You end up spending more energy and more effort stressing than if you just did the work and just relaxed and did the work. And I've learned that well enough to tell myself that, but I still do catch myself, freaking out, going like, "Oh my gosh, this isn't where I need this story to be."
Yeah. But for the process-wise, it was synopsis first, one page executive summary, and then that turned. The titles all came very quickly for the first 3. I have one for the 4th, but it's still classified. And then those one-page executive summaries turned into outlines, that then turned into novels.
I could tell your mother was a librarian.
She is.
I asked
still.
Jack once, it seems so interesting that he would go from being, a Navy SEAL to an author, and what was the bridge? And it turns out it was his mom, the librarian, who really fostered a huge love of reading in you.
Yep,
And
from a very early age.
So you actually always wanted to be a writer, but you paused to be a SEAL on the way, right?
That's right. We wanted to do both, but the SEAL thing had to come first. So that's just by the the nature of time. So that came first, and I didn't really realize it at the time. But all that reading that I'd done in this space, in this genre, reading guys like Tom Clancy and David Morrell and Nelson DeMille and A.J. Quinnell and J.C. Pollock and Mark Olden, all these guys in the 80s, and then when we got into the 90s, I discovered Stephen Hunter, and then later Daniel Silva and Brad Thor and Vince Flynn, and then later Mark Greaney. These guys were all my professors in the art of storytelling.
And now you get to hang out with them here.
I know, it's so exciting. I love it. I feel very comfortable.
Last fall, it was so wonderful. Jack and I were having dinner, and he said to me, "I've always wanted to meet Clive Cussler." And I said, "Okay, you can come back." And what was it? I don't even remember what. And I'm so glad he did, because I really do think that our last November event with Clive might be the last live event that he's going to be 90 this year, and I'm so glad. We have fabulous photos, don't we?
We had some great ones.
It was
so nice.
really
It was so great
wonderful.
to me.
But I was so glad that, and I wish more authors would speak up and say, who would you like to show up with, because we can usually figure that out.
You're looking at me.
But, send me a wish list.
I'll send
we'll
you
work it out.
Yeah.
We're already here.
So somebody's already asked, are you going to come back on April 13th with Jack, or are we going to bring in David Morrell?
You need to get David. He loves
You're
David
gonna be
Morrell.
aware.
He loves David Morrell. No, I'd be available, but I'm sure I'll be his backup.
We could do another.
I'll be the movie guy.
We've already rehearsed the trio. I mean,
Yeah.
we can do that. Well, you can let me
Take
know.
this on the road.
That's right.
It would really be fun,
Yeah.
just sort of be like, like the Marx Brothers?
Yeah.
Whatever.
We got it down.
We do.
He'll be Dean Martin. I'll be Jerry Lewis.
Just study out.
So I'm really, really delighted that Jack has asked you professional questions. I'm so glad that you're here to do that. But I'm going to ask you a couple of bookseller questions,
Okay.
since actually my motive in part was to sell this book to people. Why don't
Hey,
you
me
tell
too.
us about the instigating incident and what, a brief sort of outline of the plot here, just up to
Sure.
where
Yeah.
we get going.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit basically about chapter 1, which sets the stage, and you've already seen some of the research that I did. I had an idea. This is kind of as you explained. You have ideas for future books, but not the next thing. I had an idea forever about having court go after a Bosnian war criminal, a Serbian war criminal. I did a lot of research on the Bosnian Civil War, and a long time ago, and I actually wrote a book called The Last Enclave that never got published, and it's still, I'm still proud of it. As story-wise, it's one of my favorite things I've ever written. But it was about the Srebrenica massacre in 1995, where the Serbians executed 8,000 men and boys, Bosnian Muslims, and a guy named Ratko Mladic was the colonel who ordered all this, was in command of it. He went on the run at the end of the war and was in hiding for 15 years or so, and maybe more, and I think they caught him in the 2000s. And unfortunately, he was taken alive, which is a bummer, but he's in prison somewhere. But I had this idea about court targeting this guy from the past, and that was going to be my book. And after book 1 or book 2, you could do a Gray Man book like that, but they've just kind of gotten bigger and more geopolitical, so that in itself wasn't really, it wasn't enough. But I kept it in my head, and I could sort of map out the whole scene and how things go wrong for him and all these things. And I thought, that would be a great introduction to a book that sets it the stage for something else. So I decided that he goes after this Bosnian war criminal who is hiding on this farm in Bosnia. And while there on the farm, he discovers something which sets the stage for the whole story. And I can say what it is because this is all in chapter 1. He basically, as he goes in there to assassinate the guy, stumbles onto a way station for a massive human trafficking pipeline that goes all the way across the country, the earth. And he, by him showing up, he makes these women's terrible plight even worse because they're the ones that get punished. He can't rescue them. There's too many of them. And he has to leave them behind, but he can't leave the country. He can't turn away. He has this moral compass that he follows to his own detriment, and he has to find these women and try and rescue them. So that sets the stage for the story. You meet some other characters, a female Europol financial crimes analyst, basically just a bean counter who works for the European Union, and she's a young woman, and she has a very personal stake in uncovering what the human trafficking ring, because her sister was a victim, either missing or dead. And they together, as I said before, they go over to Croatia from Bosnia, and they go across the Adriatic over to Venice. And it was very important for me when I wrote the book that it wasn't cool American guy goes to some other country where they're having problems and gets it all squared away. That's just not how the world works. And human trafficking happens here in the United States. And we all know about the Jeffrey Epstein case, which is eerily similar in some ways. And I didn't know that much about it, even through my research. But this story comes all the way back to the United States. And so I rented a house in the Hollywood Hills for a couple of weeks, which is where the last act of the story takes place. And I have a villain who is an American, and he's a financier and does a lot of money laundering, billionaire, and kind of the Jeffrey Epstein thing, but unbeknownst to me. There's a lot of differences, but there's some similarities. So that's basically the plot of the story.
Yeah. It's a really big book with a lot of action and all the rest of it, but I'm going to do something I hardly ever do. I'm going to ask Mark to read the very last line of this book to you, because it will not be a spoiler, but I thought it was absolutely fabulous.
Okay. I don't know what the
I don't know what it is.
Are there any bad words?
Come on, Mark, trust me. How long have we done this together? I'm not saying
I was
you
going to
won't.
sit with Joey Day. I mean,
Just the last line?
Just
or?
the last
All
line.
right, okay. Oh, okay. It just says, hope isn't a strategy, but sometimes it's all you've got.
yes.
And there's a few points in this book where he talks about his mentor, who he was trained by the CIA at Harvey Point, and he had this mentor named Maurice, who died in the first book, which I regret to this day. I didn't know it was going to be a series. I thought it'd be cool to kill him. Anyway, he keeps coming back. He keeps coming back in Court's mind, and the Court remembers things that he said and things that he learned from him, and he would always beat it into Court's head that hope is not a strategy, and hope is not a strategy. So you see that in several parts of the book where he just has to go on a wing and a prayer, and then at the end of the book, without telling you the 160,000 words before that, he just basically says, hope is not a strategy, but that's sometimes all you got.
I thought it was the absolutely
Yeah.
perfect last line for this book.
Thank you.
Very,
Thank you.
very needful. Something for you to live up to, right?
A similar one in there.
All right.
So tell us a little bit about Savage Son. Give us a preview date,
All right,
because you'll be
so
back here
I'll
on
be
April
back.
13th. I'm
Yep.
mentioning the date again.
April 13th.
13th.
Yep.
Monday, April 13th.
Yeah, I'm very excited to be back here then. And Savage Son is the one I've wanted to write since the 6th grade. And when I first read The Most Dangerous Game by Richard Connell, which is a 1924 short story, and it really explores the hunted versus hunter dynamic. And even in 6th grade, I knew that one day I'd write a thriller that paid tribute to that story that was so meaningful to me back then. and it was one of the ones that was on that table for the first book.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to write it for the first book, but I knew that the characters weren't developed enough. I had to get them to a point where that I could explore the dark side of man through this hunter-hunted dynamic, and Savage Son is that novel. So it's been in the works for quite some time, since 1986.
Oh yeah, it's hard to imagine that the Terminal Man wouldn't have been. I mean, for one thing, it's just such a perfect. The Terminal List is such a perfect title. I
Thank
think.
you. That one came really quick. That
And
title
it
came
became
very
your
quick.
series title too.
Yep, exactly. And that one, I knew I had to start with that one because it was so primal, so visceral, so hard hitting, and I thought it would be the one that would be most likely to get recognized by New York and get me in the door.
Amazingly enough,
And
it worked out. So here's my other question: when you are truly rich and famous, since you're now going to be a TV series, are you still going to love us and show up?
Absolutely. That would be the first stop.
So tell us about the TV thing, because that's amazing. In book 3, wow.
Yeah, so it was actually optioned before it even came out, before the Terminal List even came out. I just couldn't talk about it up until now. I kept hoping, like the week the first book came out, I was hoping that Chris Pratt might mention something, but that a year went by, and another year went by. So this is, I think they want to get it to a place in development where they're not gonna, and they can always go off the rails. Anything in Hollywood can go off the rails. Day one of shooting, it can go off the rails. So I'm keeping my expectations very low, so I'm not disappointed. But it does go off the rails. But he read it early on, Galley, in the fall of 2017, so a few months before it came out in March of 2018. And a friend called me out of the blue from the SEAL teams and asked if I remembered him. And I said, yeah, I remember you. How's it going? And he said, it's going great. I always wanted to call you and thank you for what you did for me in the teams. And in my head, I was thinking, did I get this guy out of jail? What did I do? And he said, well, I was transitioning out. You sat me down in your office. You're the only person that talked to me about transition out of the military, introduced me to people in the private sector, and I've never forgotten that. And I was like, oh, hey, no problem. And he said, I heard you wrote a book. I said, yeah. And he said, well, can I give it to a friend of mine? I said, yeah, no problem. Who's that? And he said, Chris Pratt. Yeah, I like Chris Pratt. And the weirdest part about all this is that as I was writing, I didn't think of an actor playing, like being the character, but I thought, who could play this role? Who could play James Reese? And the only person I thought of was Chris Pratt. It's crazy. Yeah. So we'll see.
Any news from you on this one?
No, I'm kind of the sad side.
Oh.
The reason he's not counting his chickens is because he's listened to me whine about it. Yeah, I first sold the film option in 2009 to Gray Man, and then in 2014 the option came back to me, and Sony snatched it up. And then they had a 3-year option. At the end of that 3 years, they exercised their right. I was going to get it back, and they exercised their right to purchase it outright. So there's been some recent inside news that there's some positive movement on it, but there's been positive movement before, and it doesn't happen until it happens. I mean, I really am a glasses half full guy, and the check cleared, so I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to sit here and whine about it. I would love for it to be made someday, and it took Lee Child 15 years, and for his first film, and so. You just never know.
And you got Tom Cruise, right, for Jack Reacher. So now we're going to have a TV series of a taller Jack Reacher. Right. I'm not a real Tom Cruise fan, so here we go. So I had a wonderful thing that happened last night that I will share with you, which I absolutely love. Michael Carita, many of you have been here for him. He was our writer in residence. I'm trying to remember, 5 years ago. I mean, our new one for this year is Jacqueline Winspear, which I'm really happy about. She'll be here in March. But anyway, Michael was here last night under his new name, Scott Carson, for your publisher, to write a Gothic, which is a wonderful story. And in the conversation, because I hadn't kept up somehow or other, Michael has a movie coming out starring Angelina Jolie this fall, based on one of his books. And then he said, and this is the part I love, that he wrote the whole treatment and sold it to Hollywood while he was our writer in residence here in Scottsdale.
Oh,
how about that?
Cool.
I know. I felt like, because that's sort of the point of doing something like that, but Michael's the first one that's ever actually made it work. So I thought, wow, how exciting is
Proof of
that?
concept.
I know. So, it'll happen. It may be that the size of your books is working slightly against doing that because they'd be really expensive to film.
Yeah. Well, the first one is the one they've written the screenplay for, which I
Right.
really like. It was The Gray Man, which is not a big book. It's pretty pared down, and I think you're right. Yeah, Red Metal last year. I mean that. The book we did was 217,000 words. I mean, that would be into the. You would
So
pretty
hardly
much.
lift it,
It
right?
would be cheaper to actually fight the war with Russia.
But it was an outstanding book. So
Thank
I
you.
am so
Thank you very
glad
much.
that
I
you
appreciate
and
it.
Rip are going to be
Yeah,
doing
me too. I'm
another.
excited.
Besides that, maybe Rip will come again in his uniform with all his medals. It was so fabulous. Why don't you do that?
I'm out.
Exactly,
I have to shave.
Oh, well. I think at this point we're going to say goodbye to our video audience and thank them very much for joining us this evening. And guys, if you want to share this, you can always go to our Facebook page and share it to your own. And then your friends will be so envious that they weren't actually here, but still. Are you done?
Boyd Morrison says hi. He's watching.
All right.
Boyd is watching.
Yeah.
Hi, Boyd. Why aren't you here?